Tai Tuivasa walked back to the locker room after UFC 325, knowing he had lost again. But this time, the hardest part wasn't the judge's decision. It was knowing his son was watching. After a long layoff and months of preparation, Tuivasa returned to the Octagon, hoping to reset his career. Instead, he suffered his 6th consecutive UFC loss. And while the fight itself was competitive, the moment that followed revealed something deeper: a fighter confronting doubt, responsibility, and the reality of what it means to keep going when winning no longer comes easily. Because this wasn't just another loss on a record. It was a moment that forced Tai Tuivasa to ask a difficult question: how long do you keep trying when the results stop coming? The return at UFC 325. UFC 325 was supposed to be a turning point. After a lengthy absence from competition, Tai Tuivasa returned to the heavyweight division with renewed focus. According to publicly available information, he had committed to a full training camp, surrounded himself with his longtime team, and entered the fight determined to prove he still belonged among the UFC's elite heavyweights. Across from him stood Talison Teixeira, a physically imposing opponent with momentum and confidence. From the opening round, the contrast in styles was clear. Teixeira relied on pressure, control, and consistency, while Tuivasa looked for timing, power, and moments to swing the fight back in his favor. The bout was competitive. Tuivasa absorbed damage, but remained active. In the final round, he appeared to find a second wind, pushing forward and threatening a late comeback. For a moment, it felt like the familiar story: Tai Tuivasa surviving adversity and turning chaos into opportunity. But when the final horn sounded, the result went to the judges: a unanimous decision loss. 6 losses in a row. The emotional aftermath. What followed wasn't anger. It wasn't excuses. It was honesty. Shortly after the fight, Tuivasa shared a message on Instagram that captured the emotional weight of the moment. "That hurts the soul more than any punches," he wrote. In a sport defined by physical punishment, Tuivasa made it clear that emotional pain can cut deeper. He acknowledged the effort he put into camp. He thanked his coaches at 333 MMA. He expressed gratitude to the Australian fans who continued to support him, regardless of results. And then came the line that resonated most: "I'm sorry for falling short again." There was no attempt to soften the reality, no denial, just a fighter openly admitting disappointment, not only in the outcome, but in how often that outcome has repeated itself. A father's perspective. One detail stood out more than any statistic. Tuivasa's son was there. "My poor boy has watched me get a hiding a few too many times now," he wrote. For years, fans have associated Tai Tuivasa with celebration, the shui, the smile, the chaos. But this was a different version of him. A father explaining loss not as failure, but as persistence. He described telling his son that giving everything you have is what matters. That effort, not outcome, is what defines character. That sometimes life doesn't reward you immediately, even when you do everything right. "I didn't get the result, son," he wrote, "but that is how life goes sometimes." It was a reminder that behind every fighter is a human being navigating pressure, not just as an athlete, but as a role model. How did it get here? To understand why this loss carries so much weight, you have to look back. Not long ago, Tai Tuivasa was surging. In 2022, he was riding a 5-fight winning streak, capped off by a knockout of Derek Lewis, one of the most memorable moments of his career. At that point, Tuivasa was being discussed as a potential title contender. His style was dangerous, unpredictable, and fan-friendly. Then came Cyril Gane. Tuivasa lost that fight, but it was widely viewed as a strong performance. It earned Fight of the Night honors and showed he could compete at the highest level. But that loss marked the beginning of a difficult stretch. Fight after fight, Tuivasa found himself on the wrong side of the result. Different opponents, different circumstances, same outcome. His losses have a way of compounding, not just physically, but mentally. Confidence erodes. Pressure increases. Every fight becomes less about progression and more about survival. The heavyweight reality. The UFC heavyweight division is unforgiving. Margins are thin. Damage accumulates. Careers can turn quickly. With 6 consecutive losses, questions naturally arise, not from critics, but from the reality of how the UFC operates. Roster decisions are performance-based. Longevity is not guaranteed. As of now, there has been no official word regarding Tuivasa's future with the organization. But his own words suggest he's not ready to walk away. He doesn't sound defeated. He sounds motivated, but aware. A willingness to change. One of the most interesting moments from Tuivasa's post-fight message came at the end. Kamzat Chimaev, I'm coming to wrestle, brother. Teach me. It was partly humor, but also insight. For years, Tuivasa has been known primarily as a striker. Powerful, aggressive, willing to trade. But modern MMA demands evolution. Heavyweights who rely solely on striking often find themselves neutralized by more well-rounded opponents. By publicly acknowledging his need to improve, particularly in grappling, Tuivasa showed self-awareness. I'm sick of this cuddle stuff, he added, a line that drew laughs, but also underlined a serious point. He knows what's missing, and he's willing to address it. What comes next? So where does Tai Tuivasa go from here? That question doesn't have a simple answer. At 32 years old, he's not past his prime, but he's no longer early in his career. Every decision now carries weight. Training changes, coaching adjustments, matchmaking, mindset. The difference between revival and retirement often comes down to whether a fighter can adapt, not just physically, but emotionally. The mental cost of losing. Repeated losses test more than skill. They test identity. For fighters, competition isn't just a job, it's how they define themselves. Losing once can motivate. Losing repeatedly can create doubt. Tuivasa's message suggests he's aware of that internal battle. He didn't hide from it. He addressed it directly. He admitted the feeling was awful. He admitted it hurt. But he also reaffirmed his commitment to keep trying. That balance between honesty and resilience is rare. Why fans still care? Despite the losses, Tai Tuivasa remains one of the UFC's most popular heavyweights. Fans connect with authenticity, with fighters who don't pretend everything is fine, with athletes who share the struggle, not just the highlight. Tuivasa has never been a manufactured persona. What you see is what you get. And moments like this, difficult, raw, human, only deepen that connection. The bigger picture. This isn't just a story about a losing streak. It's a story about accountability, about effort without guarantee, about showing up even when confidence is shaken. In combat sports, the line between success and setback is thin. And sometimes, the most meaningful moments don't come from victory, but from how a fighter responds when victory disappears. Tai Tuivasa didn't promise a comeback. He didn't blame anyone else. He didn't hide from the moment. He simply acknowledged where he stands and committed to continuing. Whether that journey leads to reinvention, resurgence, or closure remains to be seen. But what's clear is this. Tai Tuivasa is still fighting, not just opponents, but expectations, doubt, and the weight of responsibility. And sometimes the hardest battles happen long after the cage door closes. The next chapter of his career won't be defined by one loss, but by what he chooses to do next.